Hello, you lovely listeners. I'm Amy. Welcome to the Really Good Conversations podcast, where we will delve into the minds of the business people we have met in the process of launching our first card game. We will be uncovering their secrets to success, their biggest mistakes, and sharing the key lessons they have picked up en route. So, if you're looking for an engaging chinwag mixed with business insights and a good pinch of fun, you're in the right place. Let's have a really good conversation. Welcome to the Really Good Conversations podcast. Today I am joined by Nicole Runyon, a psychotherapist, parent coach and author. Nicole helps parents raise resilient, independent children by focusing on what really shapes them, their environment, not just therapy. In her new book, Free to Fly, she tackles the impact of tech and the rise of over-permissive parenting, and why letting kids face discomfort is essential for their growth. Welcome to the podcast, Nicole.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Oh, thank you so much for joining me. And, you know, as a parent of a toddler, I think your work is definitely of interest to me and my world. So, Nicole, I first came across your work through a LinkedIn post where you shared your experience with Psychology Today. You were offered a regular blog, then had it withdrawn after your first post challenged some of the mainstream views on children's mental health. This really stood out to me because I noticed in that post you said sometimes the psychology industry doesn't actually want people to get well. And I must say, I've often thought that about medical organizations or the pharmaceutical industry. You know, it doesn't really make sense for them to actually cure people. It's not necessarily good for business if people are no longer buying their products. So I'd love to just touch on this first before we get into some of our further conversation. Being a trained psychotherapist, how did you come to this realization that really the industry you've trained in wasn't necessarily looking to fix people?
Well, I was in private practice for a lot of years. So I always say I was kind of living under a rock, and literally my office is in the lower level of a building. So I was very much on my own, not really talking, or I would network with some therapists in my community, but not really talking to other of my colleagues. And we have to take continuing education in our field to maintain our licenses. And so I would take those courses, but I would do them online and I would get my credits and I would go on my way. And it wasn't until I started to put my work online that I realized what the overall culture of my field had become, because I was getting a lot of pushback when I started to talk about the change that I made in my private practice. I had seen kids for 20 years. And along the way, what I learned about this generation of kids in particular is not so much that they need the therapy or that they should be diagnosed or pathologized or medicated, frankly, but that the parents really need help, because we are dealing with something culturally with technology that no parent has ever had to deal with in previous generations. And we really need a lot of help. And what I'm finding is that the kids are exhibiting mental health symptoms, but they're not mentally ill. What's happening is they're like the canaries in the coal mine. They're sensitive to their environments, and they're telling us something with their behavior, with their mental health symptoms. And we're not listening overall as adults. We're not listening from an educational standpoint. We're not listening from a parental standpoint. And the mental health field isn't listening to that either. We're just doubling down on more treatment. If they're in therapy, then it's therapy and medication. And if they're on medication, they're not getting better, then it's more care. So day treatment, where they are in therapy all day. Or then it jumps to overnight hospital stays or psychiatric care facilities. And these places are overloaded with kids. And so my thought is I don't want to see a mental health facility on every corner. I want to get to the root of the issue. And so then when I started to put my work out there and get this pushback, I thought, well, what has happened to my field? And what I realized is that, I think it's become, like you mentioned, like the overall healthcare industry. It's an industrial complex. It's a way for big money to capitalize on people suffering and pain. And then what I realized is that is what's happening. Private equity is buying up mental health facilities, and they're making a lot of money out of churning people in and out of their facilities. And I don't think that's okay to do to anybody, but especially our children. So I really want to speak about that and help parents understand that you don't actually need mental health treatment in most cases. If your child has no known trauma and these symptoms are showing up, then there's assistance and help that you can get for yourself to help your child. And I think that's more sustainable.
Yeah, gosh. And it is a crazy thought that, yes, these organisations you think are there to help people and guide people. But yeah, at the end of the day, a lot of them are businesses. Mm-hmm. You've touched a bit on your background, but what first drew you to the world of psychotherapy?
Oh, well, I've known that I wanted to be a child psychotherapist since I was 10 years old.
Wow.
It's a calling for me. It's a force. It's something that I just had to do. There wasn't anything else I saw myself doing. And I remember specifically I had a moment with my youngest brother, who was 9 years younger than me, when I was 10. And at the time I thought, well, I wanted to help children, and I could either be a pediatrician or a child therapist. And he was a toddling toddler, and he fell one day and he scraped his knee, and I helped him clean it up and bandaged it. And the entire time I had this like pit in my stomach. And it wasn't like, oh, I don't like the sight of blood. It wasn't, I'm scared of it. None of that. I really have come to know that feeling as empathy. So in that moment, I decided, well, there's no way I could be a pediatrician. I can't even clean up a wound without having a stomach pain. So, and I thought, well, then I'll be a child therapist. And it never changed. I never wavered. And there was a couple of situations where I could have easily chosen something else. But it just is a calling for me.
And you've got 2 children yourself. How has your personal experience as motherhood shaped the work that you've been doing?
Well, there's a parallel between my understanding of the struggles I've had with my kids and how, especially with my oldest, I've sort of put that lens on him like something's wrong. And it wasn't until I looked at myself, my husband looked at himself, and we looked at our like family dynamic that anything could change with him. So I had this experience from a personal standpoint even before I made this change in my practice. And it very much did affect the choice to make the change. Yeah.
And I know in some of the, I guess, reading that we've done as we were preparing for our little one to come into the world, and since there is a lot of work out there of, the children are a sponge and absorb everything that they see and hear and from that environment. And it is, what are you saying as that adult? What are you pairing in? And is there anything you would have done differently looking back now as a parent, do you think, and from, the research and the work you've done?
Oh, absolutely. I would have done a lot differently, mainly with my older one. I have my kids are 5 years apart. So we joke in our family that we made all the mistakes on him, and his younger sister is very much benefiting.
I imagine you're not the first one.
Yes. Yeah. I think that's a common experience. But I think mainly the biggest thing that I would have changed was allowing him to be uncomfortable sooner than I did. So my expectation was, as he got into the middle childhood years, like 9, 10, 11, that he would be doing more independent and able to work through frustration and have a higher tolerance for that. But he was struggling with that at that time. And I looked back in like his toddler years and his younger years and realized that I didn't introduce that concept early enough. And part of it was that he was an only child for 5 years before I had his sister. So I was more available to do those things for him. And it just was second nature. I didn't really think much of it at the time. Things like tying their shoes. This is a frustrating task. It's a task that us parents have to be patient with and stand by and be able to help them with it. But we shouldn't be doing it for them, because it's really important that they have these experiences where they work through that frustration and they get to the other side of it and they feel capable and strong. And that actually helps build their tolerance for discomfort, and they can develop agency and trust in themselves.
Yeah, God, yeah, that is a really good insight. Just talking about the therapy side of things for a moment. Over the years, what have been some of those most common challenges that parents have come to you with?
Mainly their children have anxiety. This is probably the biggest issue that I dealt with in my practice. And the anxiety is because, again, like I was saying, when you don't trust yourself, then you develop this sense of not having control over the uncontrollables. And we all know that we can't control things on the outside, but people with anxiety try to because they don't feel like they can have control over themselves. And that can come in the form of unresolved emotional issues, or for a child particularly, it's often because something in their development didn't go right. The parent didn't allow them to get to the other side of a growth opportunity. And so the anxiety develops because I'm not sure that I can handle whatever it is that gets thrown at me that's uncertain. And this is for children, everything is uncertain, and they're not in control of very much at all in their lives. So the anxiety is very magnified for them. And I think parents feel powerless. So they bring their anxious children to a therapist. And again, and I'm not saying that anxious children should never go to therapy. I'm saying if your child is exhibiting anxiety because of something that happened to them, like you can actually pinpoint, okay, this was an event that was very upsetting, very disturbing, possibly even traumatic, and I don't know how to help my child through this, then that's where therapy could be beneficial. But if your child is anxious because they're missing points in their development, then therapy is not helpful, because the parent is still going to maintain that kind of dynamic in the environment and on a regular basis consistently at home. So you can have the child in your office for an hour a week, which I did. And it's not that I didn't make a difference for them or help them, but it's only because I was connecting with them and I was somebody that was hearing them and seeing them, where I think their parents can do that. And actually their parents are better at that than I am. And I want to see more parents doing that.
Yes, they're getting the child's support in that moment, in that, I said, hour session, but it's like they're just outsourcing the parenting. Mm-hmm. Like I sometimes think this about schools. For some schools, if you're, again, go to a private school where you're paying the fees, I think for some parents, there is that mentality, well, it's the school's job to instill these values or this behaviour. That's what I'm sending them to the school, where it's not actually the parents doing that role. And where can then therapy, start to do more harm than good? Because if they are only coming for that 1 hour, as you said, they come and great, they might open up and connect and feel great in that 1 hour space, but then they leave and they're just returning to the same environment.
That's right. And the reason why it can be harmful in those cases is because when they leave, they think too much about their feelings. And, often there's homework about your feelings, journal how you feel, talk about how you feel. And it's like, okay, that's only part of it, because we don't want kids internalizing their feelings and not talking about it and stuffing it down, but we don't want them to ruminate and overthink about how they feel. And so the middle ground is really, that's why the parents really need this kind of education, because they can exist in the middle where, okay, I see that you're struggling. Let's talk about it. But then now what are we going to do about it? What do you have control over? What's your part in it? And what's the solution? And how can I help? So I want families to feel like they can do that on their own without a therapist, because then kids don't ruminate. They get their feelings out, they work through their feelings, they get to the other side of it, and they find a solution. So then they have more control over themselves, because that's in reality all we have control over, right? We can't control anything else but ourselves.
And you've just made me think then, when you're talking, there's the concept of journaling and thinking and almost analysing our thoughts and looking back. That's perhaps not even healthy really for adults to be doing too much of.
Well, that's right. Yeah. So it's not just kids. It's we all, I think, are in a culture where we think too much about ourselves, and then we go online and we're taking selfies. The camera is literally facing us instead of the outside world, and then we're posting and we're looking at everybody else posting, and then we internalize that and we feel bad because we don't look like that person, or we're not on vacation like that person is, and so it can be very damaging to constantly be thinking about how you feel rather than looking outside of yourself and recognizing that, okay, I feel bad today. What can I do? Can I go for a walk? Okay, that might help. Can I help a friend or a neighbor? Like, get outside of you and in that internalizing feeling of how you feel. And that actually can go a long way. So it's affecting all of us. It's not just the children.
Yeah, absolutely. When parents are worried about the circle of friends that their children may get in with or get into the wrong crowd at school, how can parents control that? Or do they just have to accept that they can't?
I actually think it's neither. I think we can't control it, and we shouldn't accept it either, because that's going to affect our kids in a negative way.
Yeah.
What I think needs to happen is parents need to know, and this is why I think your work is so important with the cards, because parents need to know that they can connect to their children. Even as they grow and they become teenagers and they reject you and they say, no, I don't want to be with you, you have more of a powerful influence over them than you think. And in fact, you should have that presence, because more and more they're getting exposed to media, and they're getting exposed to media in severe, extreme ways constantly. And we more than ever now need to stay closer to our kids so that we know what they need. And if we're connected, then we know, okay, well, those friendships aren't good for you. And they're going to hear us when we say, hey, is this the kind of friend you want? Like, how can we, how can I help you, or how can you help yourself find new friends, right, that are good for you? And here's some examples of what friends should be doing. And if your friends aren't doing this, then maybe you need some new friends.
Yeah.
So it's this idea that we influence them. We don't tell them what to do. We don't control them, but through our connection, they do what we value.
So, Nicole, you mentioned media then when you were talking about our children and consuming a lot of media. And, currently there is a lot of talk about children and screens. And you've highlighted that it's not just what they're watching, it's what they're missing. Can you share your views on the tech impacts and whether you see different effects at different ages?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Child development is very important, and it's also very delicate. So it's foundational. Each stage of child development works like the rungs of a ladder, so they build on each other. And if a stage is broken or missing, then it's not impossible to get to the next stage. It's just that much harder. If too many stages or too much in childhood is missing, then we really have some problems. And what we're finding with Gen Z, who were born between 1997 and 2012, is that they're struggling in the world. They're having a hard time with their independence and their maturity and thinking for themselves and making decisions and overall just being healthy and well. And that's because they were the first generation really to have technology so early on in their lives. And technology has fractured a lot of their development. So it's not that they can't regain it or work through it at this point now that they're adults. It's just going to be that much harder. And it's important that we understand what happened so we know how to help them, or so they know how to help themselves. And essentially what happens is, from the moment that you're born, development is, each stage of development needs to be met. So from 0 to 18 months, it's attachment. Babies cry, parents respond, that builds trust. From 18 months to 3 is will and autonomy. And that's the time when, the 2-year-olds will say no, and I will not, and do it by myself. And this is a time for parents to really insert a lot of boundaries, because when they want to be independent and separate, generally speaking, they're not safe in doing that. So parents need to make sure that they're safe and allow their independence in the confines of that. So the independence in that age really needs to come in the form of allowing them to do things by themselves and teaching them and being patient with them while they work through that frustration. And if that can happen, then they can move to the next stage, which is autonomy and independence from 3 to 5. And, often parents will say now, oh, it's not the terrible 2s anymore. It's actually the terrible 3s. There's a lot of tantrums in the 3s.
Yeah. The three-nager.
The three-nager, yes. And, that's because 2 isn't really going very well because iPads are getting introduced. What's the percentage? I think it's something like 40% of 2-year-olds own their own iPads. It's a high percentage. Yeah. And it's because that's infiltrating the development and they're not getting to the other side of what they need to learn. So they're going into 3, 4, and 5 with tantrums because they didn't work through the frustration and respect the boundary from their parent and that parental authority. So they're kind of taking over, from 3 to 5. They're like ruling the roost with their parents. And that's why parents are saying it's the terrible 3s, but it really actually shouldn't be. So that's just a small example of like a little hiccup that's happening.
Yeah.
And then when we move into like more of those school age years between 5 and 12, that's when they should be building confidence. But if they don't know how to have boundaries and respect boundaries from 2 when the iPad was introduced, then they're going to have a hard time building confidence. And then, kind of so on and so on. Between 12 and 18 is when they're building their sense of independence. So if they don't have confidence, then how can you possibly know who you are? And, these are just like small things that are happening in their development that people don't think anything about because everybody's doing it. You can even rewind even more to now, like these kids that are like the alpha kids, the current younger kids, their parents had iPhones. So when they were babies, their parents' eyes were in phones rather than locking eyes with them. And so a lot of them are lacking that attachment and that feeling of safety in their nervous system. And we wonder why there's so much anxiety. So, yeah.
Wow. And I'm making mental notes as you go, because as we touched on before we started recording, I've got a 3.5-year-old and through the journey, there has been the device at different stages. But we've really tried to manage it because we have observed some of that behavioural change. If you take it away or if you've said no and that reaction, and I've said to Alex, you can see this isn't good for him. You can see this isn't positive, at times, that experience. But what are we not, so you may have already answered this really, because what are we not seeing or talking about enough in this space?
Well, just what you said, the fact that you as parents were aware of it, you were telling me before we started recording that you noticed that if he had it for like a long time on a longer car ride, you would see, the change in his behavior, and you would see that he was getting trained to want it in the car because he had it in the car. And that's what we're missing, is that awareness. I don't think most parents are recognizing those things that kids are trying to tell us. So when I meet with parents for the first time, I'll ask questions like that. Like, do you notice more outbursts during times when they had a lot of screens or too much junk food? And most parents don't really have answers for those questions because they don't think about what's going on in the context of that addictive thing they're giving their child. So we really want some awareness, because once you see it, once you see it, you're like, oh, we have to do something about this now.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
It becomes a little bit easier to figure out what to do and to commit to doing it, because it's hard.
Yeah. And for people listening who may have children of different ages, but they're thinking, oh, my goodness, well, the screens are surrounded by us now. And, they are now growing up in a digital era. So whether it's the TV or the phone or the iPad or a computer, what practical tips could you share with parents to manage that screen time?
Well, I like to think of it in age groups and ages, and talk about delaying and because you really would just want to prevent from that lack of development, especially early on. Like 90% of brain development happens before you're 6. So these are really critical times when we don't want to disrupt that with technology. So I say, from 0 to 5, there really shouldn't be any use of technology, iPads, TV. From 3 to 5, 3, 4, and 5-year-olds, I think it's perfectly okay to watch a family movie together here and there. Definitely not every day, but something where it's like an event and the family's doing it together. And in a central location, like a TV in a living room or something like that. And then from 5 to 12, I recommend minimal usage. So if they're going to use an iPad, they need to be supervised, because we think that things like Roblox or YouTube Kids or, these safe social media sites now that claim that they're alternatives to TikTok because they don't allow nasty content or DMs. We think that these are all okay and we can let our guard down and let our kids play these things without supervision. But, Roblox was found to be a pedophile hellscape.
Yes.
I don't know if you saw that research study, but yeah. So, groomers and predators, they know where the kids are and they're infiltrating kids' spaces right under their parents' noses, and parents think it's all great and safe and wonderful. And even, like my teenage son was just telling me that on Roblox, they have a fake gambling game. It's called Planko. And it's fake in the sense of you don't pay for it.
Yeah.
But the kids are literally gambling on Roblox, and they're being primed and trained to think that's fun, to get that dopamine fix. And then when they're older, they're actually gambling online. And my son was telling me that actually many kids are lying about their ages. They're figuring out a workaround, and teenage boys especially are gambling online. And they're primed from early on. And so again, we think, oh, this is so safe. It's so great. It's for kids. We don't have to watch them. No. So if you are going to allow your kid on a device between those ages, they really need to be supervised and used very minimally. And if you ask me, I don't think they should be on it at all, even supervised. And then from 12 to 14, I like to recommend safe smart devices like a Gab Wireless makes, a safe device where there's no internet, there's no social media. There's also Pinwheel. I think there's some other companies now. There's definitely a market now for being able to keep in touch with your friends, because that's practical, but being safe about it. And I noticed that in group chats, kids at those ages, they'll send each other TikToks or Instagram reels or whatever. But if you have a safe device like a Gab, you can't receive those videos. So you can ensure that your kid is, not watching the garbage, frankly, is what I call it. And then at 14, they can have a smart device with lots of limits. No social media until 18. That's my recommendation. And there's lots of reasons for that developmentally. So I went over a little bit of that, but in my book, I get really in depth about what's going on at what ages and why I have the recommendations I have.
And it is crazy, because I do feel and I see we are in a sort of entering a world where we are trying to claw back and almost reverse time. And it is hard, because what you're explaining and almost advising does sound in a perfect world. And there's probably a lot of parents just thinking, oh my goodness, this just sounds impossible, because they get the pressure from the child, or there's the other children that don't have this. And obviously now with the TV and the different streaming platforms, there is just so much content out there. And I think some of it, you touch on, discomfort, and it's kind of discomfort both for the adult and the child, because the parent, and I know myself, you give in. Yeah. Because you just think, oh, well, I just need to get on with doing X, Y, and Z for half an hour, or do I want to get into a full battle about, saying no to this right now? Often I'm saying in my head, okay, pick your battles. Is this a battle that I want to really put my foot down on, or is this one I'm happy to let slide? But yeah, you're doing it often because for your own ease as well.
Well, yeah. And, I think it's because of what I saw so blatantly in my practice that
Yeah.
there was absolutely a correlation between the mental health issues that I was seeing in kids and their use of technology. It started right around 2014, 2015. I saw it in my practice. And this is when mostly middle schoolers were getting smart devices. I had girls coming in to see me for the first time just after getting discharged from the hospital after their first suicide attempt.
Oh, gosh.
And intact families, loving, supportive parents, no trauma. And this was tearing them apart. And so for me, and I know parents don't see this side of it. And so that's why I'm trying to educate people. For me, it's like literally, I'm not sugarcoating this. Literally, their lives depend on us saying no.
Yeah.
And so as uncomfortable as it is, as inconvenient as it is, as much as a parent doesn't want to have that battle, it's a must. We have to have that battle. And you won't have that battle forever. What I'm recommending, the delays, you will have well-adjusted kids who actually don't miss it that much. Sure, they're going to argue with you. They're going to say, oh, I'm the only one and I don't have friends and all the things. But again, if you maintain that closeness and connectedness, they won't be missing really much of anything. And to the parents who have given it and are listening and think, oh my gosh, what do I do? How do I walk it back? I have recommendations for that. The very first part of that is I think it's perfectly okay for parents to apologize to their kids for bringing something into the family that they didn't understand themselves. And they understand it now. They're learning about it. They're educating themselves. And when we know better, we do better. Yeah. And so that can be the foundation of a conversation of like, okay, we're going to make some changes because this is our family value system and we value closeness and connectedness over, media that's affecting you and a lack of, development and all these problems that are happening. This is what we value. And then parents need to fill up their kids with what's missing because they were on the devices and the tech. So, community activities, more time together. So again, inconvenient for parents for sure. But, time together doesn't have to be, I call it a Disney day. It doesn't have to be a Disney day. You don't have to go to the, ends of the earth to entertain them. Time together can literally be, hey, we need to make dinner and we need groceries. Come to the store with me. You pick out these items. I'm going to pick out this item. We're going to go to the cashier. You're going to learn how to do money. We're going to come home. We're going to make the dinner together. We're going to eat the dinner together, right? These are things that are practical. You would have to do those things anyway, but your kid is going to come along with you instead of being on a device while you do all the family chores, right? And that goes for laundry and dishes and lawn work and all the things that parents are overburdening themselves with and not teaching their kids or having expectations that their kids do those things. And that's actually what fills us up, right? It gives us a purpose. It gives us a sense of pride. Imagine if your, 10-year-old learned how to make you dinner. How good would they feel about that, right? And then they don't miss the device because you're giving them their childhoods.
Yeah, absolutely. And I see my little one, he loves attempting to help cook dinner. And his recent thing is like, Mummy, I'll make you a coffee. And there he is at the machine and he's grinding the coffee beans. I think he just likes the sound of it. So there's coffee going everywhere. And then obviously he tips it just straight into the pot. It's obviously not in the filter. So I am slightly thinking, well, all that coffee bean has now gone to waste. But he's just, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's great, Max. Thank you. It's obviously, it's going to take a longer time to make that coffee, or it's going to take a longer time to make the food. But again, like the other week, he was peeling sweet potatoes. And he did a great job of it.
Oh yeah. Yeah. You can get them actually to a point where they're actually helping you in the kitchen.
Yeah.
So it does take time, and you're right. It's longer and they make a mess and you have to be patient, but I'll never forget the first time my daughter, who's now 11, was actually a help for me in the kitchen, and she was 6 years old.
Yeah.
And she actually helped me make dinner. And I was like, whoa, this is amazing. And I had my kids on a stool, on a step stool helping me cook since they were 2. So they've both been in the kitchen and they both know how to do those things. And again, these are life skills.
Absolutely.
So many of our Gen Zers, they don't know how to cook. And they're embarrassed by it. They will order takeout, they'll plate it, and they'll serve it to other people as if they cooked it because they're so embarrassed that they can't cook themselves.
Yeah.
How sad is that?
Oh, it's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
We'll talk a little bit about the book, Free to Fly. What inspired you to write Free to Fly?
Oh, well, all of this inspired me. I want parents to know that there is a solution, that the solution is not as hard as we think it is, and it's not unrealistic, right? Like you were saying, I was talking about delaying, and you were saying, gosh, you can't imagine how parents would feel about that now because it's so not what everybody is doing. And while I acknowledge that taking this road it's being a leader, and leaders are sometimes lonely and sometimes most of the time uncomfortable and not popular. And so this is not a time to follow. This is a time to do something different because we know that it's not good for us.
Yeah.
And I really want to empower parents to make that choice. And I want to give them practical things they can do and not just, hey, take the phone away. It's not that simple.
Yeah.
If you take the phone away, you have to do a lot of other things to make sure they're okay without the phone.
Yeah.
And
you share in the book the Free to Fly framework that you've developed. Can you share any just insights into that framework for the listeners?
Yeah. So I talk about child development in the form of what's like a wheel. So at the top of the wheel, there's a movement, which is the very beginning of a child's development. Even babies have primitive reflexes, and they need to be able to be free to exhibit those reflexes. And if they're in front of a screen or a smart bassinet, or their parent is in front of a screen, they're not moving the way they need to, because movement actually scaffolds the brain for growth. So that's the next part of the framework, is brain development. And then if the brain can develop, then the social emotional growth can occur. And that the social emotional growth is a lot of what we were talking about with the tying their shoes at 3 and, doing independent tasks. And when they're 10, teaching them how to cook and things like that. And then if they can do that, then they can move into the final phase, which I call a connection to self. And what that is 3 points in childhood where a child separates or individuates from their parent. And these are natural experiences, and they come with a lot of angst for parents and for kids. And so I really help parents through that process. And those 3 points are 2, 9, and 16. And it's important that kids get nurtured in their independence during those times if we want them to launch and fly.
What would one thing you hope every parent can take from the book?
That we are so much more powerful than we think we are. And while big industry is really after our kids, just like I compare big tech to big tobacco, they want to hook young users so they have users for life, and they want all of us to think it's good for us and good for our kids, and it's the way of the future. And if we don't give it to them when they're young, then they won't know how to use it and all of these things. And I want parents to know that's just a big lie, that you actually are your child's future, and you are what they need, and you are enough.
What's something you believed about parenting or childhood 10 years ago that you no longer believe today?
I used to think that kids were like siloed in who they are, like this is who they are, and there's not much a parent can do to change that. And what I've learned now is that they're very much like sponges, and they mimic us, and they react to their environments, and their reactions are true and real, and we need to pay attention.
And if you could gift every child one skill to carry into adulthood, what would it be and why?
Working through hard things.
Yeah, we all need that.
Yes. And just being uncomfortable and knowing that, things are not going to be easy, and growing is hard and it's painful, and you need to be experiencing those feelings. You can't avoid them. That's a part of it.
Yeah. Nicole, thank you so much for everything you've shared today. We could really chat for quite a few more hours. I'm going to jump into some of our really good conversation cards and put you on the spot with some of these. So question number 1, if you came with a warning label, what would it say?
Oh, I like that one. It would say, I'm really tough. And, I hold people to high standards and I have high expectations.
Oh, that's interesting. Question number 2. Who has had the biggest influence on your life?
My parents. Yeah. They shaped me. They're very loving, generous, supportive people. And they're a very strong influence because their life goal was to keep our family together. There's 5 of us in my section. And they succeeded. Wow,
yes. And through the work you've got done, I mean, do you now look back at your childhood and equally see either when you were, whether it was a terrible teenager or your parents were also trying to instill a lot of what you're saying today?
Absolutely. I think they didn't know how to communicate it. And so I didn't react well to it, but they had the overarching value system of what I now work with parents on. And it's that idea of discipline and structure and working through hard things and, failing and learning from it. And, they didn't have the skills or the tools to talk to me about it and explain it. They just showed it. And I didn't react well to that. But now with this lens of, being an adult and having all these experiences and seeing kids for many years and working with parents and having my own kids, I recognize very much what they were trying to do and I appreciate it now.
Yeah. And I think if we think about a lot of the previous generations, it was very common that you didn't actually talk and share feelings and discuss things. Things were often, swept under the carpet, weren't they? Or we don't really want to discuss that. So, every generation, we're learning different ways, aren't we, of how to connect and communicate.
That's right.
And the last question I will ask you is question number 3. What was your favorite subject at school?
Well, it was psychology. Yeah. I really didn't like school until I was in high school and I was able to take an elective. It was a psychology elective. And then I suddenly realized, I'm actually interested in this and I want to do the homework and I want to do the reading. And I never really liked any other subject besides that.
Wow. Yeah. So you were meant to be in this path from a young age.
Yeah.
And the last question that I like to ask all of our guests is, if you could ask any person, dead or alive, who would it be and what would you ask them?
Well, so this is interesting because of how you introduced your work before we were recording, is that your idea was born from your husband's grandfather passing away. And so my answer to that, before you even told me that story, is both of my grandfathers, because they both died before I was born. And so I never met them. And the question I would ask them is, tell me your story.
Yes.
Because I never got to hear it from their mouths. Yeah.
Oh, that's beautiful. And it's crazy because even when we have these people in our lives, we often don't take the time or get the opportunity to ask them the stories, or you just think people's journeys, and there's often so much more to it. So thank you for sharing that. How can our listeners find out more about you, your work, your book, and connect with you?
Yeah, so my website's NicoleRunyon.com. There's a tab on there under my book. So if you want to order my book, you can do so there. And I'm on LinkedIn as Nicole Runyon. I'm mostly active there. I'm also on Instagram and Facebook at iGeneration Mental Health.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much for everything you've shared today. It's been really great chatting to you.
Thank you. It was lovely chatting with you.
Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Be sure to check out the show notes for more information on today's guests. And if really good conversations are your thing, hit subscribe and join us next time for more business journeys, insights and banter.